There is a narrative in the Old Testament that, to be completely honest, I consider one of the most striking in the entire Bible. Perhaps it is not suitable for a younger audience. Therefore, before we continue with this video, it is crucial to warn that the content may not be appropriate for all ages and may evoke painful memories. This story is recorded in chapters 19 to 21 of the book of Judges. Although many are familiar with chapter 19, few delve into the complete narrative. Still, I believe there are valuable lessons we can extract, even from such a disturbing account. First, I will recount the events in a dramatic manner, and then I will analyze the lessons they offer us. Follow along with me. In the book of Judges, chapter 19, we read that, in those days, Israel had no king. A Levite who lived in the hill country of Ephraim took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. It is important to understand that this Levite lived in northern Israel, while his concubine was in the south, in Bethlehem. The narrative tells us that the woman was unfaithful to the Levite, leaving him and returning to her father's house in Bethlehem, where she stayed for 4 months. The Levite then decided to go after her, traveling from the hills of Ephraim to Bethlehem, with the goal of reconciling and restoring the relationship. Upon arriving in Bethlehem, the woman's father welcomed him with great hospitality. For several days, the Levite tried to leave with his concubine, but her father insisted that they stay one more night. This repeated until, finally, the man decided to return. It is from this point that the tragedy begins to unfold. During the journey back north, toward Ephraim, they approached Jebus as night fell. The servant suggested that they spend the night in that Jebusite city, but the Levite refused, saying he would not stay in a foreign city. They decided to press on to Gibeah. When they arrived there, it was already night, and no one offered to take them in, something unusual in Israelite culture, where hospitality was a fundamental value. Finally, an old man found them in the square and asked why they were still without shelter. Upon hearing their situation, he offered his house for them to spend the night. The Levite thanked him and assured him that they only needed a place to rest and something to feed their animals. However, the story takes a dark turn. During the night, wicked men from the city surrounded the house, demanding that the old man hand over his guests so they could abuse him. The old man tried to dissuade them, offering his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine, pleading with them not to commit such an atrocity against the man. What happens next is unimaginable. In verse 25, we read that, in the face of their insistence, the Levite handed over his concubine. The men raped and abused her all night long. At dawn, they left her. Now you understand why I emphasize that this video may be unsuitable for minors and may trigger painful memories. Imagine the suffering of this woman, dishonored repeatedly. Finally, she managed to return, exhausted, to the doorstep of the house where her master was, but she collapsed there, too weak to enter. At dawn, the Levite opened the doors to continue his journey and found his concubine lying at the entrance, with her hands reaching the threshold. When he ordered her to get up, there was no response, for the woman had died. The account continues, and in a shocking act, the Levite took her body home. There, he took a knife, cut her body into 12 pieces, and sent each piece to different regions of Israel. Everyone who saw it was horrified, saying that nothing so heinous had ever happened since the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. It is important to reflect on this account. After the tragic event, the Levite not only took his concubine home and mutilated her but also attached a letter to each body part, sending the pieces to the 12 tribes of Israel. In each letter, he detailed the heinous act that the members of the tribe of Benjamin had committed. When the other tribes received and read about the woman's fate, they were horrified, saying that something so terrible had never happened in their history. This story continues in chapters 20 and 21 of the book of Judges, and there is still much to explore from this point. Let's begin to extract some lessons. The first is that when there is a lack of responsibility in our lives, there is a strong tendency toward deviation. Judges 19 highlights this by mentioning that, in those days there was no king in Israel. When we feel no need to be accountable or fear taking responsibility for our decisions and actions, we tend to follow destructive paths. The absence of responsibility leads us to believe that we can act in isolation, without needing to answer to anyone. This was the context in Israel at that time. There was no king, and although there were laws, they were neither respected nor enforced. The result was that people took actions they probably never imagined. This lack of responsibility contributed to a series of unexpected and disastrous events. The second lesson I want to highlight is the importance of treating every human being as bearing the image of God. In the narrative, the old man demonstrates a flawed perspective by stating that it would be wrong to harm the man but that they could do whatever they wanted with his daughter and the Levite's concubine. This mentality reflects the belief that the life and dignity of the man had more value than that of his own daughter and the concubine. It is essential that we recognize in every person the image of God, attributing to them an inalienable value. This leads us to reflect on our attitudes, especially when consuming inappropriate content online, and to ensure that we treat others with respect and dignity. The third reflection I want to emphasize in this video is that, as we drift away from God, we become more susceptible to actions we never imagined we would commit. When we analyze the book of Judges as a whole, we observe a nation that was progressively drifting away from God. Chapters 19 to 21 represent the climax of this distancing, showing how far the nation had strayed. This narrative serves as a warning to all of us. If we do not maintain a close connection with God, we may end up straying and doing things that once seemed unthinkable. Staying close to God is essential to avoid falling into temptations and sins that, at another time, we would not even consider. Unfortunately, the story becomes even more complicated in chapter 20, when a civil war breaks out between the 11 tribes of Israel and the tribe of Benjamin, due to the heinous act committed by the latter against one of their own Israelite brothers. I recommend reading chapters 20 and 21 in detail, but, in summary, a colossal battle results in the loss of thousands of lives on both sides. By the end of the war, only 600 men from the tribe of Benjamin remain. In chapter 21, the other 11 tribes begin to feel compassion for the tribe of Benjamin, concerned about their possible extinction. The 600 surviving men have no women from their own tribe to marry and perpetuate their people. This compassion, however, creates a new problem, as they fear the disappearance of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. This situation leaves us with a fourth lesson: every wrong decision we make brings inevitable consequences. Despite the grave initial error of the Benjamites, the decision of the other tribes to fight and kill was a choice that now generates undesirable consequences. The Benjamites also face the repercussions of their destructive actions. Every decision, whether good or bad, brings with it consequences that shape our future. Often, we are forced to face the repercussions of our past choices. This narrative highlights that, although we can choose our actions, we cannot choose the consequences that accompany them. The story continues to show how the Israelites made another poor decision by allowing the Benjamites to kidnap women during a festival, justifying this action to avoid breaking an earlier oath in which they promised not to give their daughters to the men of Benjamin. This event illustrates how one wrong decision often leads to another, creating a sequence of unexpected and often disastrous consequences. Thus, during the festival, 200 men of Benjamin kidnapped women who were dancing, taking them as wives. I recognize that this is a shocking story, and I have tried to summarize it briefly. However, the main point is that one wrong decision often triggers another, and a series of poor choices can negatively impact many lives. When analyzing this story, it is evident how many people were harmed by a single wrong decision. Some men of Benjamin faced deserved consequences, but most of the Benjamite people, who had not directly participated in the initial transgression, perished in the battle. Additionally, the people of Jabesh-Gilead also suffered losses, and their women were taken from their land, becoming victims of these circumstances. Here is the fifth and final lesson I want to highlight: God grants us grace even in the midst of our most destructive decisions. The book of Judges concludes by reporting that the Benjamites, despite their actions, managed to rebuild their cities, live in them, and were given a new chance. Each Israelite returned to their tribe and family, reclaiming their inheritance. The last verse of the book emphasizes a defining characteristic of that time. In those days there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This phrase summarizes the entire book of Judges, highlighting the lack of effective leadership and the consequences of each person following their own path. Thus, even in the face of destructive decisions, God manifests His grace by allowing the tribe of Benjamin to rebuild. However, it is essential to understand that, although grace exists, decisions continue to bring consequences, often unpredictable and uncontrollable. If there is one thing I want you to take away from this video, it is that every choice we make brings consequences, some of which we cannot even foresee. Until next time, and with that, we conclude another video. I hope today's lessons have touched your heart and helped you reflect on the consequences of our choices. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and, of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Your subscription is very important for us to continue growing together on this learning journey. God bless you, and see you in the next video.